What's going on, YouTube? Welcome to Bad Takes in Football. This is your host, Bad Takes. Really excited to hop into today's video, but before I do that, this is a new channel, which means you are new. Please subscribe, like, comment, tell me more about what you're looking for. Really excited to engage with you. I really hope you enjoy today's video. In the AFC East is Miami Dolphins, right? Miami Dolphins, I'll be honest, to me they're sort of a mystery team in my opinion. There's so many things that I like about the Miami Dolphins, but at the same extent, there's so many issues I have with the Miami Dolphins as well. Last year they went 8-9, and I think a lot of people consider that to be a disappointing year. Injuries were a big issue for the Dolphins last year, but still at the same time, the level of talent that the Miami Dolphins have, especially on the offensive side, is staggering, right? Whenever you have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle on the same wide receiving core is absolutely insane. A lot of people would put Tyreek Hill as one of the best receivers in the NFL, but for me, I don't think Jalen Waddle gets the love and the attention that he deserves. At this point, I would actually probably put Jalen Waddle as a better receiver, in my opinion, than a Tyreek Hill. But I also think Tyreek Hill is a great receiver. So that is not downplaying the ability of Tyreek Hill. That's just me telling you that I think that Waddle is one of the best receivers in the NFL. I could very easily see him being a top 10 receiver in this league. And to me, Tyreek Hill, you know, I think he's going to be sort of on the downtrend. I think he'll be able to be a solid wide receiver too for the Miami Dolphins this year. I don't think he's going to have the impact that people are hoping for from like a Dolphins fan perspective. Biggest addition for me is Minkah Fitzpatrick. Going back, the Miami Dolphins drafted Minkah Fitzpatrick in the first round. Now, after 1 year, they just as quickly traded him to the Steelers and got another first round pick and I think a second round pick out of it. But they brought Minkah Fitzpatrick back in a trade, which also included Jonnu Smith, their tight end, and then also Jalen Ramsey, their cornerback. So, they did lose some players in this trade, but they got Minkah Fitzpatrick back. They also added Matt Judon, veteran edge rusher. And me personally, I'm a big fan of Matt Judon. I think he's a great pass rusher. I do think that he's seen the end of his sort of dominance, though. He used to be a huge disruptor for many teams, and I would say over the last 3 years, you've seen that drop off a little bit. And with himself aging more and more, I do think you'll see Judon getting somewhere around maybe 5 sacks this year, right? He'll have a little bit of an impact, but I don't necessarily see him being the answer for the Miami Dolphins, by any means. From a core perspective, you're talking about Tua Tagovailoa, you're talking about Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill, and then you have Devon Achane, right? So Achane is a great running back for them. He is an amazing receiving running back. He's got quickness. He's got big playability, right? So they've had this core. I would say their offensive and defensive line have probably taken the biggest impacts and the biggest changes. I've mentioned these secondary moves as well. But overall, their core, including their head coach Mike McDaniel, I just still feel like there's this like cohesion issue. I think a lot of people, when you go back and look at what happened at the end of last year, right? I'm talking about when Tyreek Hill, made the statement that he wants to be on a winning team and he needs to get out of Miami. But that's a huge example of what I'm talking about when it comes to cohesion for the Miami Dolphins. I'm a big fan of Mike McDaniel. I think he's super funny and witty. First off, I think maybe that's the most likable aspect of him. I know he's also super smart and very analytical. But to me, Mike McDaniel, he's a very likable coach. But at the same time, I wonder about the discipline side of things with him. I don't think that's ever going to be his strong suit. But at the same time, he's dealing with a personality like a Tyreek Hill who, seemingly in every aspect of his life is sort of a basket case, in my opinion. I think he's a great receiver, but hearing about his personal life that's constantly being talked about, and what he does off the field, but also Tua Tagovailoa and Tyreek Hill have a relationship issue as well. That's a big problem when you're number one wide receiver, in my opinion, number two wide receiver, and your starting quarterback. your franchise quarterback who you've paid is having issues with each other, right? That cohesion is going to be a major challenge. You need to have that relationship to be the best relationship in the locker room, without a doubt, right? Mike McDaniel, Tua Tagovailoa, and Tyreek Hill need to be on the same page at all times in order for the Dolphins to be able to reach really the potential that they have. I definitely actually expect the Dolphins to take a little bit of a dip from last year, right? They were 8-9 last year. I expect them to actually end up around 7-10. And this is coming from a fact, even with the fact that they have like the 11th easiest schedule. So it's not like top 10 easiest schedules, but to me, again, I just don't see the cohesion with this team. I see a bunch of talent, but I don't see the fact that the Dolphins are ever able to really put it together. They've done it in spurts. They've been dominant in spurts. Like I remember 2 years ago, there was a point in time where Tua was considered to be the MVP favorite, right? He was having an amazing year. Concussions have been his biggest issue, and it's honestly a truly really scary situation because I don't know how many more times Tua can get a concussion before he really needs to seriously consider retirement. I was kind of shocked he didn't last year when he had the same issues. I don't know. When I look at that team, I just see a bunch of positions with a bunch of talent that just isn't able to put it together. And I think to me that's the biggest reason why I see them taking a dip this year is if it hasn't happened yet, I'm not exactly sure what is going to change for the Miami Dolphins going into this regular season. Like I don't know if there was a point in time this offseason that I haven't heard about or anyone else has heard about that, they came together and they figured things out. Mike McDaniel was sending very cryptic messages in his post game or his post practice press conferences. I could definitely say that. It was very obvious to me that Mike McDaniel is not happy or over, what Tyreek Hill said about the Miami Dolphins. And so again, for me, that's why I really see the Dolphins at 7-10. Could they very well go 10-7? I think 10-7 would necessarily be their ceiling. It's very possible, but again, for me right now, I see them at 7-10. If there's anything I see that changes going into these first couple of regular season games, and I see that them having fun, and I see them being able to play together, I'd probably change what I think about the Dolphins. But again, to me, the biggest issue is cohesion.